At Falcon Ridge Air Force Base, where the roar of F-16s echoed like thunder across the desert flats, a small group of young pilots gathered outside Hangar 9 for their pre-flight check. They stood tall in their immaculate flight suits, trading jokes and swagger the way every new generation of aviators did, loud, confident, and convinced they owned the sky. But their playful arrogance sharpened the moment they noticed an old man standing at the chain-link fence just beyond the concrete barrier. He wore faded blue jeans, dusty brown boots, and a red flannel shirt that looked older than half the jets on the ramp. His white beard fluttered slightly in the jet wash, and his hands, scarred, weather-etched, trembling lightly, rested on the fence railing as he watched the aircraft with a gaze that was too focused, too practiced, too knowing. The pilots laughed the second they saw him lean forward, head tilted, eyes narrowing like he was listening to something only he could hear. "Look at Grandpa Top Gun," one of them joked, "probably here to relive his imaginary glory days." Another pilot cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey, old-timer, these aren't museum pieces, you can't adopt one." The group erupted in laughter. The old man didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't even look offended. He simply kept staring at the jet on the ramp as if the insults were as irrelevant as dust on the wind. That only irritated the loudest of the pilots, a newly certified lieutenant who strutted toward the fence with a cocky grin. "You waiting for the jet to talk back to you, Pops?" The old man slowly turned his head, eyes calm, expression unreadable. "Already did," he said, voice soft but steady. "One of your engines has a compressor whine. You won't hear it unless you've spent 40 years around Pratt and Whitney turbines." The pilots froze for a heartbeat, then burst out laughing even harder. "Right," the lieutenant sneered. "Next you'll tell us you can smell an exhaust imbalance." The old man nodded once. "Leaking fuel manifold on the right engine. Tiny, but it's there." The lieutenant's laughter died halfway through his next breath, but pride pushed him past his hesitation. "Buddy, do you have any idea who you're talking to? We're Air Force pilots. This is our world." The old man looked back at the roaring jet, listening in a way no one recognized, then spoke with quiet certainty. "And I flew long before any of you were born." His words weren't loud, weren't dramatic, but they landed with the weight of truth, the kind that made even the cockiest pilot blink. Yet instead of reconsidering their behavior, the young airmen doubled down on their bravado. "Sure you did, Grandpa, and I suppose you trained Superman too. Maybe he taught Batman how to hover," another joked. The old man didn't bother replying. He simply shifted his stance and returned his gaze to the aircraft, as if calculating something in his mind, angles, airflow, the subtle music of the turbine blades. And that was when everything subtly changed. A distant engine spooled up cleanly, smoothly, yet the old man's head snapped toward it instantly, detecting something none of the pilots had noticed. Whatever he heard, it wasn't small. He stiffened, his posture straightened, his expression sharpened. Something was wrong, and he knew it, but the pilots didn't. They were too busy laughing. And this moment right here is where everything begins to unravel. Keep listening, and tell me, which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. The engine's pitch shifted again, just for a heartbeat, a thin, strained note buried under the steady roar, like a violin string pulled a little too tight. The old man's eyes narrowed, his head tilting slightly as he listened, shutting out the laughter, the swagger, the casual arrogance of youth. He'd heard that sound before, years ago, when the sky over another continent had been full of tracer fire and missile smoke. Back then, that sound meant you either caught it in time or you wrote condolence letters home. Now, it was happening on a clean American ramp, under a blue sky that had never seen war, and nobody else seemed to notice. "You hear that?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to the pilots. "Hear what, Grandpa?" the lieutenant shot back, smirking as he adjusted his flight gloves. "All I hear is a perfectly healthy bird and an old man trying to sound important." The old man didn't look at him. "Right engine's running uneven, just a hair. Compressor stage is starting to chew itself. You push her hard today, that hair becomes a crack. Crack becomes shrapnel. Shrapnel doesn't care how good you look in that suit." One of the younger pilots shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the jet, but the lieutenant barked a laugh to keep control of the group. "Relax, guys. If there was a problem, maintenance would have flagged it. We've got diagnostics, sensors, live data feeds. We don't rely on Grandpa's magic ears anymore." The old man finally turned, fixing the lieutenant with a stare that was neither angry nor afraid, just infinitely tired of seeing the same mistake on a new face. "Sensors don't know what they're listening for," he murmured. "Men do." For a second, the ramp disappeared for him. The concrete under his boots became the steel deck of a carrier at night. The desert air turned into salt spray and jet fuel haze. He was 30 again, not 70-something, crouched under the wing of a Phantom while alarms howled and a pilot screamed over the radios about losing thrust. He remembered the way the engine had vibrated against his palm, the way the pitch had climbed just a fraction of a note before it let go, the way fire had blossomed out of the exhaust like a dragon's breath. He remembered running, dragging a fire hose, hearing the rescue teams shouting over the chaos. A pilot had survived that night because someone had listened before the gauges caught up. He blinked and Falcon Ridge snapped back into view. Different time, different faces, same danger. Down the ramp, a crew chief in a reflective vest walked past, giving the pilots a casual thumbs up. The lieutenant seized the moment. "See, cleared by crew. Now unless you're on the maintenance roster, you're just a spectator, old man." He stepped closer to the fence, his tone sharpening. "Matter of fact, how did you even get this close? Security, slipping if they're letting retirees hang out on the line like it's an air show." One of the pilots pulled out his phone. "Want me to call security forces, sir? They can escort him back to the retirement home." The old man's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. He just shifted his weight and leaned slightly closer to the chain link, listening again, chasing that elusive note in the turbine's voice. It was still there, ghost-like, buried, but real. "I'm telling you," he said quietly, "you take that jet up today without checking that right engine, and you're betting your life on a computer that's never smelled burning metal." The lieutenant's patience snapped. "All right, that's enough. You don't talk to my pilots like that. You don't question my jet. You're done here." He gestured sharply toward the gate shack. "You've had your fun. Go home. Watch the airshow on YouTube like everybody else your age." The old man's eyes flicked to the control tower, then back to the jet, then to the young officer's face. For the first time, something like steel entered his expression. "I'm not here to watch an airshow," he said. "I'm here to make sure I don't have to watch a fireball." The words landed heavier than any of them expected. The laughter faded, leaving an uneasy quiet in its place, broken only by the distant howl of another jet taking off and the clack of tools from a nearby hangar. One pilot shifted his weight, looking between the old man and the lieutenant as if torn. The lieutenant sensed the hesitation and squared his shoulders, doubling down. "You are not qualified to make that call," he snapped. "You're just some old guy at a fence. I'm the aircraft commander. I say she's good, that's the end of it." The old man stared at him for a long moment, then sighed, low, resigned but not defeated. He looked past the pilots, past the ramp, toward the squadron building where decisions that actually mattered were made. "We'll see," he murmured, almost to himself. "We'll see who listens first." And as he turned away from the fence, starting the slow walk toward the gate shack, none of the young pilots realized that somewhere inside that building, someone else had already noticed the old man's presence and recognized the way he listened to jets like they were old friends whispering secrets. The old man had barely made it 10 steps toward the gate shack when the sound hit him again, faint, metallic, wrong. He paused, turning subtly as if just admiring the ramp, but in truth he was still tracking the rhythm of the compressor blades inside that right engine. He wasn't imagining it. He'd heard that exact oscillation before, years ago, on a carrier deck soaked with salt and chaos. Back then, it was an F-14 Tomcat bleeding itself to death during night ops. The pilot had lived only because an enlisted tech, someone with no rank, no glory, just ears tuned by experience, had caught the warning signs before they cascaded into catastrophe. The memory struck him hard enough that he closed his eyes. The heat of Falcon Ridge faded, replaced by cold ocean wind and the thunder of jet blasts bouncing off steel walls. For a second, he could smell burning insulation and hear a crew yelling for fire suppression. When he opened his eyes again, the present felt heavier. He didn't want to watch another kid burn because someone was too proud to listen. Behind him, the young pilots were still murmuring. A couple laughed quietly. One sounded unconvinced, but the lieutenant quickly shut that down with a glare sharp enough to slice metal. "Nobody listens to runway philosophers," he muttered. "If that old fossil knew anything, he wouldn't be standing outside a fence." But the old man didn't look back. He kept walking toward the gate, slow, methodical, while the sinking realization grew that he might actually have to escalate this, something he hadn't done in decades. As he approached the security checkpoint, the young airman at the booth looked up from his clipboard. "Sir, everything all right?" The old man hesitated. Behind him, the pilots were beginning pre-flight checks, climbing the ladder, talking in clipped, excited tones. He could hear switches flipping, batteries coming online, electrical hum building. His heart tightened. "Is the squadron commander in?" he asked quietly. The airman blinked. "Yes, sir. Colonel Hargrove is inside. Why?" The old man weighed his words carefully. "Tell him someone from Carrier Group 5 is here, someone who worked engines." The airman frowned, confused. Carrier Group 5 hadn't existed under that name in decades, but before he could ask anything else, a voice boomed from behind them. "Hey!" The pilots were waving him off, mocking. The lieutenant cupped his hands around his mouth. "Stop bothering the airman, old man. Nobody's calling command for your dusty stories." The old man ignored them, but the airman didn't. He looked again more carefully at the old man's posture, his bearing, that unmistakable calm carved into the faces of men who lived through things others only read about. "Sir," the airman said, straightening, "do you have a name I should give the colonel?" The old man took a breath. "Tell him," he paused, saying it felt strange, like dusting off a relic. "Tell him the wrenchmaster is asking for him." The airman's jaw dropped slightly. That call sign, no, that legend wasn't theoretical. It was something aircraft maintainers whispered about, a myth from the old Navy about a man who could diagnose engine failure by touch or sound alone. Someone whose ear had saved entire carrier wings more than once. The airman didn't question another second. He picked up the phone with urgency. Meanwhile, the pilots had climbed into their aircraft. The engines began to spool. The high-pitched whine knifed across the flight line. And there it was again, that dangerous vibration blooming inside the turbine like a storm cell forming in silence. The old man turned toward the jet sharply. He could hear it louder now, clearer, undeniable. And just as he took a step forward, the door to the squadron building burst open. A tall, broad-shouldered colonel stepped out, scanning the ramp with sharp eyes until they landed on the old man. He froze mid-stride. The pilots didn't notice. The lieutenant didn't notice. But the colonel's face drained of color as recognition hit him like a missile. He whispered the name like he was seeing a ghost. "Sir, is that really you?" The old man didn't answer. He just lifted a hand, pointing at the jet. The colonel's expression shifted instantly from shock to urgency to outright fear. "Shut those engines down!" he roared. And suddenly everyone on the ramp understood something was very, very wrong. The colonel's voice ripped across the flight line like a warning siren, cutting through jet noise, conversation, and ego all at once. Every airman within earshot froze, head snapping toward the squadron commander as if gravity itself had shifted. The lieutenant, halfway into his cockpit, blinked in confusion. "Sir," he shouted back, forcing a laugh. "Everything's green on the panel. Engines are spooling just fine." But the colonel wasn't looking at him. He was sprinting full stride toward the fence, toward the old man standing beside the gate guard, his faded jacket fluttering in the turbine wash. "Shut! ITDOWN!" the colonel roared again, pointing at the aircraft like it was seconds away from exploding. The crew chief on the ground hesitated for only a fraction of a heartbeat before waving frantically to the pilots. Kill power now!" The pilots looked at one another, startled, unsure, thrown entirely off balance. The lieutenant shook his head stubbornly. "No way! Everything's fine! This is some kind of drill!" Then the colonel vaulted the low chain, landing hard on the ramp, fury and fear in equal measure etched into his face. He stormed toward the jet ladder. "Lieutenant, if you do not shut that aircraft down in the next 3 seconds, I will personally remove you from that cockpit and ground you so hard you'll forget what the sky looks like." The tone wasn't angry, it was terrified. That alone made half the maintainers freeze. The lieutenant's bravado cracked. "Yes, sir, what's happening?" The colonel didn't answer him. Instead, he turned to the old man with a look of reverence rarely seen on a military flight line. "Sir," the colonel said, breathless, "I never thought I'd meet you in person. I thought your generation was all gone." The old man gave a faint, almost embarrassed nod. "Not yet." "Airman," the colonel barked at the nearby crew chief. "Open engine diagnostics, manual readouts. I want vibration signatures now." The lieutenant finally powered down, shaken, hands trembling as the turbines began to cool. The flight line fell into a surreal hush, broken only by the whining spin-down of metal blades. All eyes turned to the old man. The colonel stepped closer, lowering his voice as if speaking to a man of higher rank. "Sir, I heard you were gone. They said you disappeared after the last carrier decommissioned." The old man shrugged lightly. "Didn't disappear, just got old." "Old?" The colonel huffed a humorless laugh. "Sir, you're a legend, the wrenchmaster, the one who caught the compressor failure on the Truman by sound alone. The one who saved an entire wing in '89 when every sensor said the aircraft was fine." The pilots stared, mouths slightly open. The lieutenant's smirk had evaporated completely. But the colonel wasn't done. "My father served under you," he said quietly. "He told me stories about how you could put a hand on a jet and tell her pain before the diagnostics even warmed up." The old man didn't answer, but his gaze drifted toward the aircraft, still ticking with residual heat. "She's hurting," he murmured. "Right engine S out of balance, compressors wearing uneven. If he'd taken her up today, he didn't finish. He didn't need to." The colonel swallowed. "Crew chief, report." The crew chief turned from the diagnostic cart, face pale. "Sir, the turbine's showing an early-stage compressor stall pattern. Minor vibration on sensors," but he hesitated, looking at the old man with sudden awe. "But he heard it before the system flagged it." The colonel nodded slowly. "Of course he did." Then he turned, fixing the lieutenant with a stare that could have cracked reinforced glass. You mocked him. The lieutenant opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You ignored a safety warning from a senior. The colonel stopped himself. No, from the senior, from the man who wrote half the emergency procedures you rely on to keep you alive. The realization hit like a bomb. The young pilot stood silent. The ground crew stood reverent. Even the airman in the booth had stepped outside, watching with wide eyes. The colonel turned back to the old man. His voice softened. Sir, would you honor us by inspecting the aircraft yourself? It would mean more than you know. For the first time, the old man looked uncertain, shy almost. Been a long time, he said quietly. Muscles don't climb ladders like they used to. Then we'll bring the ladder to you, the colonel replied instantly, snapping his fingers. A stair platform was rolled over in seconds. The old man placed a hand on the rail, and the entire flight line held its breath as he prepared to ascend. The old man lifted his foot onto the first step, moving slowly, deliberately, each motion revealing the weight of decades carried in his bones. Yet there was a steadiness in him, a quiet authority that made every airman watching straighten unconsciously. By the third step, the flight line had fallen into total silence. Not the usual professional hush, but a reverent stillness, like a ceremony no one had rehearsed but everyone instinctively knew they were part of. The colonel stood at the bottom of the ladder, hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the aging mechanic as if witnessing history unfold. The young pilots who minutes earlier had mocked him now held their helmets awkwardly at their sides, shame burning behind their eyes. Even the lieutenant, the loudest voice of arrogance, seemed to shrink with every passing second, his confidence eroding under the weight of realization. The old man reached the engine cowling and laid his hand gently against the metal, his palm flat, fingers spread. He closed his eyes, shutting out everything, the wind, the murmurs, the distant thrum of other jets, until all he heard was the quiet ticking of cooling steel. He leaned in slightly, listening. The flight line watched a man commune with a machine as though it were a living thing. After nearly a full minute, he stepped back. His verdict came in a single sentence. Stage 2 blades are wearing uneven. She's starving for airflow. The crew chief's head snapped toward the diagnostic tablet, his fingers racing. Seconds later, his eyes widened. Confirmed, he breathed. Sir, it's dead on. The wear pattern matches exactly. A wave of disbelief rolled through the gathered personnel. The lieutenant swallowed hard, his face draining of color. The colonel rose up the ladder until he stood just one step below the old man. How did you know? He asked quietly. The old man exhaled through his nose. Engines talk when they're hurting, always have. Most folks just forget how to listen. The colonel nodded solemnly. Sir, you didn't just save that pilot's life. You saved the entire squadron from a catastrophic failure. The old man stepped down carefully, and the colonel immediately offered an arm. The old mechanic accepted it without argument, letting the officer support him as they descended. When his boots touched the concrete, something unexpected happened. The colonel snapped to rigid attention and delivered the sharpest salute the flight line had seen in years. And then, one by one, every airman followed. Ground crew, technicians, security forces, even the pilots who'd mocked him. Dozens of hands rose in perfect unison. The lieutenant hesitated, caught between ego and fear, but at last, slowly, his hand lifted too. The old man blinked, startled. He hadn't expected respect. He certainly hadn't come here looking for it. Sir, the colonel said, lowering his salute, on behalf of this base and every life your ears have saved, thank you. You are, without exaggeration, a legend in naval aviation. The old man shook his head modestly. Just did my job, like anyone else. The lieutenant stepped forward, eyes lowered, voice cracking. Sir, I'm sorry, truly. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you've done. The old man regarded him for a long moment, then placed a light hand on his shoulder. Respect isn't for who people were, he said gently. It's for who they are every day. You treat folks right, you'll fly safer for it. The words hit deeper than any reprimand. The lieutenant nodded slowly, humbled. The colonel then turned to the crew chief. Ground that jet until repairs are complete, and issue a maintenance citation noting early detection courtesy of. He paused, looking to the old man. What name should I put, sir? The old mechanic smiled faintly, the kind that carried decades of stories behind it. Just put Wrenchmaster. They'll know who you mean. The colonel grinned. Yes, sir. As the old man began walking toward the gate, the entire flight line parted for him like a ceremonial guard. Some saluted again. Others simply watched with awe. And when he finally reached the exit, the colonel called out one last time. Sir, if you ever want to teach a class here, even one session, the door is wide open. The old man paused, hands in his jacket pockets. I'll think about it, he said softly. Then he disappeared beyond the gate, leaving behind a jet saved from disaster, a squadron transformed, and a story that every airman on that base would tell for the rest of their careers.